Salvation by Jonathan Green. The roar of the storm bolters drowning out the battle cries. The veterans of Ultramar's First Company vented their righteous fury against the abomination that was the Tyranid. Shrieking, the hideous elongated head of a Hormagaunt appeared in front of Brother Rias, its fanged mouth dripping with strings of saliva. Responding instinctively, Rias turned his weapon on the creature. He watched with grim satisfaction through his visor as the creature's grotesque visage disintegrated. As his storm bolter kicked in his hand, the back of the creature's skull exploded outwards in a splattering burst of purple blood and bone fragments. As another in a long line of vanquished foes fell before him, Rias found himself looking across the entirety of the vast battlefield. The rocky plain was covered in a seething mass of flesh and armour, accompanied by support weapons and vehicles. To both left and right, the barren plain rose up to meet steep cliff face, above which the land bristled with a profusion of plants clustered in primeval jungles. The yellow sun shone down on the prehistoric steppes from a cloudless sky. At any other time, the conditions could have been described as pleasant. Reacting automatically, Rias turned his stormbolter on an advancing brood of red-skinned termagants, pumping several rounds of armor-piercing shells into the pack before they had even mounted the outcrop. Despite the repulsing fire of the squad, several of the cunning creatures had managed to infiltrate the Terminator's position. With an electrochemical charge, a flesh borer propelled its cargo of living ammunition towards its target. The veteran Space Marine was standing his ground before the milling termagants as they closed in on the ultramarine lines. The borer beetles impacted on the warrior's armor, many splattering harmlessly against ceramite plates. A few survived, expending their remaining life energy in gnawing through the armor with their viciously gnashing teeth. But none of the voracious insects made it through to the warrior within the plasteel shell. The Marine's response was to swing his right hand free, enclosed by its power fist, into the termagant's body. The creature's ribcage shattered under the blow, the fist's disruption field liquefying its internal organs. With a convulsive spasm, a spike rifle in the grip of another of the hive mind's assault troops launched in a harpoon-like projectile. The barbed spike cut through the air with a hiss before embedding itself deep into the power armor of another of Rias's battle brothers. The Terminator Marine replied with a burst of fire from his assault cannon. The termagant was torn apart by a hail of shells, its ruined carcass knocked back into the genocidal horde. Despite the Terminator's valiant resistance, Rias knew that they would soon be overwhelmed. As each of the murderous aliens fell, it seemed that there were two more all too willing to take its place. Unaffected by grief for the death of their fellows, or remorse for their actions, the inscrutable creatures of the hive mind were an awesome enemy indeed. When the Gauntlet of Macragge had come out of warp, the mighty starship's sensors had picked up the telltale signals of a massive alien presence. Scanners quickly confirmed the presence of a hive fleet in orbit around the fourth planet of the Dakar star system. Initial long-range scans of the world had revealed it to be in a state of evolution, much like that of old Earth, millions of years before the rise of man. Warm tropical seas separated three massive continents which were abounded in different environments. Great burning deserts, coastal jungles, and steaming swamps, forested uplands, globe-spanning mountain ranges. A search of the Gauntlet of Macragge's library banks had revealed that this was the lost world of Jaroth. According to Imperial records, the planet had been settled millennia ago by isolationists, and had become cut off from the rest of the universe by particularly violent warp storms, which had only abated in the last 100 years. It was that in a routine patrol of the wild eastern fringe of the Ultima Segmentum, the flagship of the Ultramarine fleet had rediscovered Jaroth. The chapter commander's first thoughts had been that no doubt if any of the human populace remained, their society would have reverted to one of superstitious primitivism. The secrets of the Imperium's technomagi would now be lost to them. Jaroth would be a feral world, inhabited by feral people. The presence of the Tyrannid decided the matter. Whatever the state of the population, Jaroth was just the sort of world that the Great Devourer would relish in plundering of all life, human or otherwise. The galaxy-spanning entity that was the Tyrannid race was voracious in its appetite. Dozens of Imperial worlds had already been totally scoured of all life to provide the alien horror with raw material. Who knew how many hundred other worlds had been infested with the insidious cults of the Genestealer, the blasphemous alien monsters working in collaboration with their corrupted human brood brethren? The Ultramarines chapter could not let another planet fall to the Great Devourer. It was their sacred duty to uphold the Emperor's laws, to defend the Imperium against the myriad menaces that threatened to engulf it from all sides. The feeding frenzy of the hive mind's children was as effective as the world-scoring process of the Exterminus, as a score of worlds would testify. Squad Bellator fought atop a rocky escarpment in the centre of the bleak valley alongside the veteran Squad Orpheus. Here and there, granite formations thrust up from a dried-up riverbed. Every outcrop was the scene of some conflict or another, with the bravest warriors of the Imperium fighting desperately to repel the invading alien horde. Rios, himself a veteran of Icar IV, was no stranger to the horrors of the hive mind, but no matter how many times he witnessed the foul abominations, nothing would ever inure him to them. He could only face each battle with the resolve and courage of the Ultramarines, as laid down in the ordinances of the Codex Astartes by the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Rabut Gilliman himself, centuries before. A unit of Tyrannid warriors emerged from the slavering Ripper swarms to confront the Ultramarines. As Rios watched, a bone sword sliced down through the ceramite shoulder pad of one Space Marine's power armor. As soon as the serrated edge connected with the flesh, the nerve tendrils within the bone sword delivered a potent psychic jolt to the warrior's body. The stun would only be momentary, but it was long enough for the Tyrannid, howling in triumph, to remove the man's head from his shoulders with its second blade. Striding behind the Tyrannid warriors, lording it over his swarm, the Hive Queen's consort came into view. The Hive Tyrant was a truly terrifying figure to behold. The monster stood over 2 meters tall. Its presence exuded a malign intelligence that filled the Ultramarines with dread. Rapid bursts of laser energy struck the Hive Tyrant, but to no effect. The monstrosity's toughened carapace absorbed the lethal blasts. With unintelligible roars, and no doubt telepathic signals as well, the master of the swarm directed the broods to seek out the humans and destroy them. The tyrant had to die. Miles overhead, thrusters fired, desperately turning the vast spacecraft on its axis, but it was too late, and the gauntlet of Macragge collided violently with the asteroid-sized pod launched from the hive ship. The massive spore mine detonated with the power of a thermonuclear explosion, the resultant shockwave shaking the spaceship. Chunks of bone-like shell as thick as fortress wall bombarded the craft. Some shards disintegrated as they struck the vessel's force field, but the shields had been damaged by the initial explosion and provided only intermittent protection. Other fragments struck the vast ship like meteors, wrecking communication antennae and tearing holes in the hull through which the accompanying shower of acids, algae, and virus-bearing particles could gain access to the craft's interior. The Imperial navigators reacted swiftly, bringing the 10-mile-long vessel under control. Fission boosters firing, the gauntlet of Macragge moved off in pursuit of the bioship. Jaroth's airless moon, no more than a planetoid that had become trapped by the larger astral body's gravitational pull, rose over the glowing nimbus of the planet. Then, the stricken bioship came into view. From the bridge of the Ultramarines' flagship, Commander Darius watched through the view-screen wall as the gauntlet of Macragge closed in on the Tyranid craft. The gigantic curled body of the organic vessel was tilted at a strange angle and appeared to be drifting. However, as the mighty Gothic cruiser closed the distance between itself and the Tyranid craft, Darius could see yet more spore mines and other sleek, finned creatures being disgorged from the bioship's gaping, hangar-wide mouth.
"On my mark, hit that abomination with everything we've got,"
the commander ordered the soldiers at the command controls. Returning to his throne of command, Darius sat down, never once taking his stern gaze from the monstrosity displayed before him on the view screen, his brow furrowed.
"Fire!"
100 turbo lasers blazed into life, great beams of intensely focused light energy striking into the already weakened Tyranid mothership. In a blaze of coruscating fire, the Nautilus shell of the massive space-traveling organism splintered. Mountainous shards flying from the creature and its soft internal organs rupturing as its body depressurized. Its 100-mile-long innards spilling into space, the great creature dropped away from the Gothic cruiser as it was caught in Jareth's gravitational field. The bioship plunged through the planet's surface, through the atmosphere, its shattered shell glowing red-hot. As Darius watched, the organism began to burn, its pink flesh cooking as it hurled planetward. The Terminator squad moved cautiously through the undergrowth, with the grizzled Sergeant Bellator at its head. The Space Marines covered the jungle in front of them and to either side with sweeps of their guns, monitoring their motion sensors for signs of potential hostile life. The surrounding trees were alive with sound. Unknown bugs clicked and hummed, whilst mosquito-like insects as long as a man's hand buzzed around the armoured warriors. With the defeat of the Hive Tyrant, the Tyranid hordes have been thrown into disarray. Pressing home their advantage, the elite warriors of the Imperium had routed the foul alien army. The less determined Termagants and Hormagaunts had fled immediately, but the rampaging, bestial Carnifexes continued to hammer the Space Marine ranks. Even when one of its fellows lay dead around it, one of the Screamer Killers relentlessly charged a Razorback. Smashing into the tank, the alien horror scythed through the plasteel armor, its razor-edged killing arms flailing. A living engine of destruction, the Carnifex had gutted the vehicle and slaughtered its crew before it was felled by a bombardment of missiles from the nearby ultramarine whirlwind. There was a screeching cry from deep within the trees to the right of the Terminator's path. Bellator fired off several rounds. All, suddenly, was quiet again.
"Precautionary fire."
Bellator's growling voice came over the Terminator's comm units.
"It could have been a Tyranid."
Had it been a Tyranid? Rios wondered. It could have just been one of Jareth's indigenous lifeforms. There was no way of knowing. With the main Tyranid force wiped out, the Terminators had been sent into the jungle to carry out a cleanup operation. With the Hive Tyrant gone, many of the Tyranid troops had gone rogue, randomly attacking Space Marines that far outnumbered them, or fled into the primeval jungles, where it was harder for the Ultramarines to follow. Although the Tyranids had been defeated, the veteran squad was still tense with anticipation. The Ultramarines' lines were miles away, and out here in the depths of the jungle, there were as much aliens as the Tyranids. "Something up ahead," Brother Julia said, breaking the communication silence. The others checked their motion sensors. Several red blips had appeared at the outer limits of the small displays.
"Be ready, brothers,"
the squad sergeant hissed. The fronds gave way to a clearing. On the far side of the glade was the crumpled fuselage of an Ultramarine's Thunderhawk gunship. It was instantly obvious to the veterans what had happened. A broad hole gaped in the side of an engine housing. Its edges were corroded with an acidic slime, and splinters of bone were lodged in the plasteel hull around it. The living cannon of a biovore had fulfilled its deadly purpose. Having been fatally hit by the spore mine, its crew no longer able to control it, the aircraft had come down on the forested plateau. A scorched path through the jungle showed where the Thunderhawk, its engines burning, had seared through the trees. It had flattened everything in its wake until it ploughed into the clearing, the soft soil thrown up around it, putting out the fires. But what had happened to the crew? "Spread out," Bellator instructed, and the Terminators immediately began to take up appropriate positions around the crashed craft. The blips were still present on their motion sensors. From the readings, Rios could see that almost all the organisms were actually inside the downed gunship. As yet, however, the Terminators had not made visual contact with them. Were they the injured crew, Tyranids, or denizens native to the planet? Were they hostile, or totally harmless? As if in answer, Rios heard his sergeant's voice again over his comm unit. "Expect the worst." Cautiously, the squad strode across the glade, the servo-assists in their cumbersome suits whirring, closing in on the Thunderhawk with every step. When the craft had gone down, it had probably been assumed that the crew had perished. However, it was just as likely that the crash would have gone unnoticed to the Ultramarine commanders, as wave after wave of myetic spores hurled down onto the teeming battlefield. Whatever the case, a rescue attempt had not been ordered. From Rios's motion sensor, it appeared that the creatures inside the Thunderhawk had stopped moving. Were they aware of the Terminators approaching them? There were too many blips for it to be surviving crew members, the Marine convinced himself. But were they Tyranids? Brother Hastus was the first to reach the crumpled fuselage. He edged his way towards the open cargo bay by hatchway as the others covered him. Several seconds dragged by as Hastus checked the interior of the cargo bay. A wave of his power fist, and the rest of the squad moved in. Rios followed into the shadowy interior of the crashed Thunderhawk, the optical sensors in his helmet adjusting from the glare of the clearing to the gloom instantly. Lightning claws raised, Sericus advanced slowly through the gunship, brushing aside dangling pipes that dripped oily fluid onto the chamber. Rios glanced down at his motion sensor, then immediately looked up in alarm. A six-limbed insectoid nightmare dropped out of the darkness. His reflexes working far faster than conscious thought, the Ultramarine automatically raised his power fist to protect himself. The creature hit the crackling distortion field and screamed as its carapace shattered. It fell, squirming onto the floor behind Rios. Julius stepped over it, thrusting a whirring chain fist into its face. And another one of the purple-skinned monstrosities was on his back. Genestealers, Rios thought. The worst fears had been confirmed. Before he could train his weapon on the Tyranid construct and blow its vile carcass apart, the monster plunged a taloned claw through the back of Julius's armor. It yanked it back out again, dragging with it the man's spine, slick with blood. A hail of armor-piercing shells from Rios's bolter punched through the Genestealer's exoskeleton, and the alien's corpse joined that of Brother Julius. Something heavy slammed into Rios, sending his armored body sprawling onto the metal floor with a resounding clang. Gripping his left arm between its jaws, another hissing Genestealer was trying to bite through the ceramide shell to get to the flesh within. The creature was swiftly dispatched with a bullet to the temple, but even in death, the Genestealer's jaws refused to release their grip. Several more shots shattered the creature's skull, allowing Rios to extract his arm. To his left, Brother Sericus was grappling with two of the Tyranid creatures, one gripped in each fist. A jet of orange flame illuminated the cargo bay as Brother Hastus kept yet more of the creatures from approaching his overwhelmed fellows. Rios clambered to his feet, shaking the Genestealer's blood from his suit. Brother Bellator stood in the open hatchway, assailed on all sides by the rest of the Genestealer brood, defending himself as best he could at such close quarters with his power sword. The savagery and the ferocity of the Genestealers was terrifying. The Stormbolter blasting, Rios rushed to his sergeant's aid. Another flare from Brother Hastus's flamer struck the frenzied press of purple bodies surrounding Bellator, and the reek of burning alien flesh filled the chamber. With a sizzling flash, an oily puddle ignited, the flames rushing back through the cargo bay, following the trail of black liquid to where it cascaded from a broken fuel pipe. Sericus's horrified gaze followed the progress of the fire, still embedded in the metal wall, through the skull of a twitching Genestealer. Rias reached the edge of the hatchway and the overwhelmed sergeant as the Thunderhawk's fuel tanks erupted in a conflagration of molten metal and oily smoke. The force of the explosion threw the Ultramarine out of the cargo bay, flinging him right across the clearing. Rias's body slammed into a thick tree. Flames engulfed the wreckage of the gunship. Rias opened his eyes slowly, his vision taking a few seconds to focus. Above him were wooden beams and the underside of a thatched roof. Cautiously, he tilted his head to one side. "Hello," said a small voice. Sitting only a few feet from him was a human child. Her keen blue eyes regarded him with intense fascination. She wore a simple smock, and her waist-length auburn hair hung in a plait over one shoulder. "Hello? Hello?" Rias mumbled in reply. His tongue felt thick, and there was the taste of stale saliva in his mouth. "My name's Melina," said the little girl. "What's yours?" Still, only half conscious, Rias tried to focus on the girl's question so he could provide an answer, but he couldn't. A nebulous fog obscured that part of his memory from him. "I don't know," he muttered, bewildered. "Where am I?" "You're at home, in our house. Why don't you know your name?" Ignoring the girl's question, Rias scanned the room from where he lay. It was small and Spartan. The only other furniture in it, apart from the bed, was a chair and small table. Lying on his back in a rough wooden bed, he could feel the straw mattress beneath him. "You do have a name, don't you?" the girl persisted. "Come away now, Melina. Let our visitor rest." Rias swiveled to find the source of the second voice. A man had entered the room. He also wore plain, pleasant clothes, and although in his 30s, he had already begun to lose his hair. "You must be tired," the man added, addressing Rias himself now. "We will leave you in peace." "No," Rias found himself demanding, something of the old authority in his voice returning. What happened to me?" "You do not know?" the man asked. "Are you not a warrior of the Emperor himself, fallen from the stars?" Rias stared at the man with incomprehension. "Am I? How did I get here?" "We saw the stars falling to earth, and knew it was an omen. The menfolk set off into the untamed lands as our elders instructed. We found you in the forest. You were unconscious and badly injured," the man explained patiently. "We brought you back to my farm, and did what we could for you. At first we were not sure if you would survive, but your holy armor helped to keep you alive. You've been asleep for nearly a week." Desperately, Rias tried to clear the fog from his mind and piece together his shattered memories. He could remember nothing clearly from before the moment when he had awoken. There was only trace images of terrible, unreal monsters, and the distant sounds of battle, like the last lingering fragments of a nightmare that are forgotten with the coming of dawn. "Who am I? What am I? Who am I? What am I?" Rias's voice was no longer aggressive and demanding, more like that of a pitiful child. The man and his daughter looked at him sadly. "I am sorry," the man spoke. "We can heal your body, but we cannot minister to your mind. We cannot help you to remember. That is something that you will have to do yourself, given time." A sorrowful silence descended over the room for several minutes. Nobody moved. "You saved me," Rias finally said, humbly. The man smiled. "Then I know what I must do," Rias continued. "I owe you my life, so now I must repay the debt. I pledge myself to your service. I will do whatever you wish." Rias tried to sit up, and immediately white-hot daggers of pain shot through his body. His mask a face of agony, he collapsed back onto the bed. "Tomorrow is another day. You can rest, then we will see." Every day, Jeren the farmer and his family tended to Rias's needs, bringing him his meals and seeing to his injuries. The little girl, Melina, was a constant companion. The time Rias spent with the child, hearing of her youthful adventures, or helping her with her letters, filled him with joy and gave him new strength to face the long haul to recovery ahead. But it was not to be a long recovery. Within days his wounds had healed as if they had never been. he was able to leave his bed and walk again, he began helping out around the farmhouse where he could. Jeren and his family, along with the other villagers, were in awe of Rias's restorative powers. The injuries he had suffered would have taken a mortal man months to recover from, if he ever did at all. "Truly, he is a warrior from beyond the stars," the people said, and heaped blessings upon the Emperor for sending them a saviour. Yet, each day, Rias still came no closer to resolving his own internal struggles, no nearer to remembering who he was or where he came from. Only a fortnight after his arrival at the farm, Rias was able to be set to work in the fields. Jeren and his family were the owners of a few tidy acres at the edge of a village, which consisted of nothing more than a collection of farms, a mill, and a local tavern. During the following months he had learnt much about the people of the village and their customs. They spent most of their days toiling in the field in order to raise crops from the unforgiving land. It appeared that the humans fought a constant battle with the surrounding jungle, the untamed lands, as the farmers called them. Wherever trees were cleared to provide more land for growing cereal crops or to graze animals, the primeval forest reclaimed an acre left fallow on the farm's boundary. Weeds seemed to grow more readily than wheat, and much of the villagers' time was spent clearing them from their fields. It seemed like the forest did not want the humans there, and was trying to evict its unwelcome tenants. Rias joined Jeren and his family in their own battle with the jungle. He would be the first up at dawn, taking a mighty axe to the twisted trunks, and the last to return to the farmhouse at dusk. The other villagers marvelled at the Starman, as they called him, for his strength was many times that of the other humans. Soon he was helping the other farmers, single-handedly repairing broken wagons and erecting barns for the grain harvest. There was not one person among the villagers who did not welcome Rias's assistance. But, for all he learnt about the resilient, magnanimous people who had taken him in, he was still no wiser to his own origins. Perhaps, he began to think, the villagers were right, that he had been sent from the stars in order to help these kind people in their plight. This growing conviction was strengthened by news that came to Jeren's farm one chill morning. A small party of farmers arrived at Jeren's door, out of breath and in a state of agitation. Jeren and the farmers spent a few minutes in anxious conference before turning to Rias. "What is it?" Rias asked, concerned. "Last night, Old Man Hosk's place was attacked by something that came out of the forest. Hosk died trying to defend his home. His wife and children escaped." Jeren paused, as if he hardly believed what he was about to say himself. "They say it was a monster, as big as a house and with the strength of a giant. And then there were the terrible, unearthly screams outside Kilm's farm during the night. This morning, Kilm found his entire herd slaughtered in the field, and his grain store razed to the ground. Everyone in the village is too terrified to go after the beast. They want you to hunt the monster down for them, and kill it." "You're the only one who can kill the Screamer, Starman," added one of the petitioners. "You will help us, won't you?" The Screamer. The name troubled Rias. He was certain he had heard it before, and that it spelt danger. Despite his unease, however, now was his chance to repay these people for their kindness and to fulfill his purpose. "Of course I will." Taking up his axe, Rias left the farm with Jeren and the other villagers and headed for what remained of the Hosk homestead. At the head of the valley in which the ruined farm lay, he saw the farmers' descriptions of the devastation had not been exaggerated. Most of the buildings had been demolished, as if something huge had ploughed straight through the wattle walls. Suddenly, the uneasy quiet of the morning was broken by a blood-curdling, high-pitched, bestial scream that cut through Rias like a knife. "What was that?" he demanded, turning to the crowd of farmers huddled behind him. "That was the Screamer," one of them replied nervously. The howling beast emerged from the line of trees on the far side of the valley. Although still a mile away, thanks to his enhanced eyesight, Rias was able to make out the monster quite clearly. He saw the bleached bone-like dome of its head, the great curved arms, the crushing hooves, the tough armor-like hide. Instantly, Rias's mind was awash with terrifying images and recalled sensations, slavering jaws, burning acid death, stinging tentacles, blood-drenched talons, fetid, decay-ridden breath, a nightmare of crimson. It was as if somebody had opened the floodgates that had been holding back his memory. Temporarily stunned, as forgotten experiences came crashing back into his mind, all Rias could do was stand stock still, staring at the beast that had banished his amnesia. "What is it, Starman?" Jaren asked.
"No, not Starman. Rias. I am Rias,"
the Space Marine mumbled, as if coming out of a dream.
"I know who I am, what I am."
His thoughts and words became more focused and determined.
"I know where my destiny and duty lie. Where is my armor? Where are my weapons?"
Hefting aside the bales of straw, Jaren uncovered the trapdoor set into the floor of the barn. "I always thought that one day you would ask for it back. When we found you, it was encrusted with dried blood, and in a condition not befitting a warrior of the Emperor. I cleaned and I polished, then laid it here, together with your mighty weapons for safekeeping." The farmer raised the trapdoor to reveal the gleaming blue armor that lay there. The Space Marine held up his helmet, a shaft of sunlight catching its whiteness in a dust-shot beam. Reverently, Rias removed each piece of the centuries-old Terminator armor from its resting place. As he did so, his gaze lingered on the badges of honor won through decades of conflict on 100 worlds. Pride welled up within him as he took every crack and inscribed line of the great stone icon fixed to the left shoulder pad. Only the most honored of the Emperor's veterans wore the Crux Terminatus. The winged skull carved into the chest plate of the armor attested to another righteous victory against the enemies of humanity. The purity seal granted him by the chapter's chaplains was still intact too. Its blessings had certainly not proved wanting for Rias. It had kept him alive, whilst the rest of his squad had been condemned to death as a result of the accursed Tyranid's intervention at the Thunderhawk. Pride turned to sadness as he mourned his departed battle brothers. He would never fight at their side again. The coming challenge he was to face would be as much for them as for the Emperor and the people of this unforgiving planet.
"I would like to be alone now,"
the Space Marine said, turning to Jaren.
"I must prepare for battle."
As Rias strode out of the barn, he looked nothing like the man who had entered. His mortal frame was encased with the mighty metal body of a Terminator, and he looked mighty indeed. He had donned the armor of his ancestors and chanted the litanies of war. Now he was ready to confront his foe. He addressed the farmers gathered outside. "This day I go to face my destiny." "Will you return?" Jaren asked. Rias turned his helmeted head towards the horizon. These people had shown him such compassion, hospitality, and friendship. Now he could finally repay his debt to them.
"If the Emperor wills it. If not, my death will serve the greater good."
"What is your name, warrior?"
"I am Brother Rias of the First Company of the Ultramarines chapter of the Imperium. May it never fail."
"Then farewell, Brother Rias. May the Emperor's spirit go with you, as do our blessings." Rias saluted the man who had done so much for him, then paused before departing.
"Jaren, will you do something for me?"
"Of course, my friend. Name it."
"Remember me."
With that, the Ultramarine turned his back on humanity and strode off down the track away from the farm, towards the primeval jungle to meet his destiny. Brother Rias froze. There it was again, a rustling in the undergrowth ahead of him. He checked his motion sensor. There was definitely something there, but was it his quarry or yet another tree fox? He had hunted the beast for 3 solid days without resting, having followed its tracks from the ravaged farmstead that now lay many miles away from him. With a bellowing scream, the Carnifex broke through the tangle of fronds before him, all 4 of its razor-edged killing arms scything wildly at the vegetation as it ran. Instinctively, Rias hurled his heavily armored body to one side, out of the way, himself crashing through the undergrowth. As he hit the ground, his storm bolter was already spitting round after round of devastating fire in the direction of the rampaging Tyranid. Still screaming, the Carnifex ground to a halt and turned, this time ready to charge Raius. Still screaming, the Carnifex ground to a halt and turned, ready to charge Raius a second time. The Screamer Killer well deserved both its name and the reputation that went with it. The piercing cry of the Carnifex was enough to discourage the most resolute of men, whilst its diamond-hard, sickle-shaped arms could easily tear apart Raius's ceramite armour as easily as it could his flesh. Its hide was virtually impenetrable to normal weapons, and the great mass of its rounded body made it unstoppable as it stampeded across any battlefield. This must be the last of its foul kind on the planet, Raius thought, left behind as he himself had been, after the defeat of the Hive Mind's forces. As the Space Marine struggled to get to his feet, almost cursing the bulky suit in which he was encased, the monster charged again. The Carnifex hit the Terminator with the force of a mortar shell. Raius crashed to the ground, splintering the branches of a tree on the way down, landing at the top of a steep, densely forested slope. The charge and the subsequent momentum of his own body sent Raius rolling down the edge, tumbling down and down through the undergrowth. He came to rest at the bottom of the slope, stunned and crying out in agony. It was like trying to wrestle a tank. Doing his best to suppress the pain mentally, Raius got to his feet. The fall had knocked out a servo assist in the left leg of his suit, so that he now walked with an acute limp. It would also slow him down. He was standing in a clearing at the edge of a great plateau, and, looking out towards the cliff edge, he saw the prehistoric terrain shrouded by the smoke of distant grumbling volcanoes. Down, in a broad valley, partially buried under a layer of ash, were indistinct outlines of alien skeletons and twisted metal hulks. This was where the battle for Jaroth had been won, and where the final conflict in the war would take place. A high-pitched screech accompanied the sound of a huge shape ploughing through the jungle towards the Space Marine. The Carnifex once more burst through the trees and stopped. Disgusting purple fluid oozed from several small holes in its chest, where the extremely tough bone and cartilage had been punctured. He had managed to wound the beast. The Emperor be praised. However, his excitement almost instantly turned to disappointment. The flow of alien blood stopped, and before his very eyes, the wounds began to heal themselves. The Carnifex could regenerate. The great creature's shoulders heaved as if the Tyranid was breathing heavily. The deafening scream continued as the Carnifex pawed the ground with its crushing horned hooves. A crackling field of bioelectrical energy flickered around the scissoring arms. As Raius watched, transfixed, the creature convulsed violently, and a glowing ball of green plasma emerged from its fang-lined mouth. Trapped in the energy field of the beast's claws, the Carnifex was able to determine the direction in which it would fire the plasmatic missile. Raius ducked as the scorching ball of plasma hurled towards him. The blazing gout splashed against the Terminator's back, bathing the armor in licking green flames. At once, the ceramite began to sizzle and dissolve. Still, safe as yet inside his suit, Raius raised his bolter, took careful aim, and fired. As many shells rebounded off the reinforced carapace as penetrated it, and those that did wound the creature seemed to make no difference as the Tyranid's supernatural vitality and single-minded desire for slaughter drove it onwards. A new pain shot through the Ultramarine's nervous system as the bioplasma reached his skin, having eaten through the armor. Raius realized there was only one thing left to do. He braced himself. As the rampaging monster ran at him, he prepared to meet its charge, not flinching as the distance between the pair rapidly decreased. As the monster hit him head-on, Raius grabbed the creature around its waist. At the same moment, he could not contain his agony and screamed. A jagged, curving arm sliced through his armor and deep into his side. The Ultramarine was now face to face with the Tyranid. Surprised by its enemy's retaliation, the creature lost control of its charge and stumbled, the momentum carrying the two of them rolling towards the edge of the precipice. The hulking monster towered over him. Raius gagged at the stench of the Carnifex's reeking breath, its grotesque face mere inches from his visor. The Marine could feel his lifeblood seeping away. It was now or never. With the last of his failing strength, he lifted his gun and jammed the muzzle between the monster's jaws. Depressing the trigger, he emptied the rest of the cartridge into the Carnifex's mouth. Shells blasted through the back of the creature's malformed head, others ricocheted around its toughened skull, liquefying its tiny brain. Rias knew he was dead, but it no longer mattered. He had reclaimed his honor and identity, and repaid his debt to the people who had saved him. Thanks to them, he could die the death of an ultramarine. Trapped within the Carnifex's grasp, he could not stop the great bulk of the beast dragging him over as it toppled over the edge of the plateau. Locked in the inescapable embrace of death, Brother Rias and the Tyranid fell into oblivion. The battle for Jaroth was over.